Okay, we're officially live. All right. What is good, everybody? Finally got around to talking Chapter 3 of Settlers, the Myth of the White Proletariat. Last time, my power went out, so we only had a conversation for about 20 minutes, and as lovely as it was, I'm glad that now we have more co-hosts here to talk about this. So, lovely co-hosts, please tell us who you are and what you're about, starting with Alele.
Hey, my name is Alil.
Sorry.
No worries, might as well get out of the way at the beginning. Yeah, so just picked up a recent interest in just settler colonialism, wanted to understand what it's about. I'm a, what should I say? I'm a candidate member of the PSL, so just kind of starting to get involved and organized. Yeah, that's it for me.
Dope. Skylar?
I'm Skylar Sabo, she, her. Uh, I have been reading Settlers for a little while on my YouTube channel, Skylar Sabo. It's really newly named with a new URL, and I have a Twitch channel um, where I also read the book, and I also re-upload the videos on my YouTube channel. So yeah,
All right. Dope, dope. Surplus cornbread?
Hey, it's Surplus Cornbread, everybody's favorite settler trash Twitter user. Uh, I, he, him pronouns also go by dumbass, that works as well. And all cornbread is valid. Sweet cornbread, savory cornbread, it
Hell
is
yeah.
all valid.
Hell yeah. Also, aka the nicest tanky I know, surplus cornbread. All right.
I accept this.
Damon, who are you? What are you about?
Hey, I'm Damon Garcia, who is Damon on Twitter, and I'm on YouTube and Twitch where I talk about liberation theology and leftist stuff. And thank you for having me here. Oh, and he him pronouns.
All right. I'm Simba, they, them. You're on my channel, so I hope you know who I am. And I just want to talk about this amazing book. All right, Kamazots, who are you? What are you about?
Hi everyone, I'm Kamazats. I am a Twitch streamer and long distance YouTuber. I predominantly focus my attention on raising voices, marginalized voices within the left, and going over politics from the global south, American First Nations, and yeah, and just overall angry guy on as angry as I can be, second only to Silver Spook. So, uh,
Okay.
if you like long rants, come check me out.
Dope. All right. And I hope. Let me just calm down, Mango, real quick. All right.
Bird
Cool.
just wanted us to get to the point.
What's that?
The bird just wanted us to get to the point, that's all.
Yeah, true. Exactly. So let's do that. Today we're talking about Chapter 3, the contradictions of nation and class. The first part is with the contradictions within the slave system, and the second part is a little tiny bit about why the settlers chose settlerism over socialism or any kind of egalitarian capitalist formation like social democracy or whatever. So, let's get to the summary. I'll try to make this quick. Uh, the growth of the slave economy kind of meant the growth of the slave population, which eventually became a problem. People like Benjamin Franklin, for example, gave up slavery and wrote that all slaves should be banned in North America. Other politicians often disagreed with him and thought that they should be taxed the same as any other livestock, but Benjamin Franklin said sheep will never make insurrection, kind of alluding to the fact that, the quote-unquote founding fathers knew that the massive slave population could overthrow them. It's well known that Thomas Jefferson was an advocate against slavery who owned slaves his entire life. He knew that there could be a successful slave revolution against the slave owners, and got so scared that the successful about the slaves revolution in Haiti, that he put together a plan for the gradual genocide of all new African people here on Turtle Island. His administration also subsidized the French planters, freeing the newly liberated Haiti. He wrote that taking newborn African children away from their parents and packing them into shipments to Africa would lead to the final disappearance of new African people. That kind of reminds me a little bit of, what the American criminal justice system does to black men today, but, that's neither here nor there. Anyway, we know that this didn't happen and wouldn't have had any chance of happening without a violent struggle because there was still, billions of dollars to be made off chattel slavery. Regardless, the northern states slowly abolished slavery as early as Vermont in 1777, trying to keep the number of new Africans down. Not because they were, for any kind of humanitarian reason, but because a very large population of slaves in urban concentrated places resulted in insurrection often enough that it was kind of a risk to settlers to have whole lots of them up there. Solutions to the problem varied. Some states abolished slavery, but in the wake of the Vesey conspiracy, for example, the Charleston City Council moved to diminish the number of male Africans in the city. Once again, kind of reminiscent of the contemporary American criminal justice system. J. Sakai says, quote, "In addition to the physical restrictions, the mass terror, etc., that we all know were imposed, it's important to see that settler America reacted to the growing consciousness of Africans by attempting to isolate and physically break up the oppressed communities. It is a measure of how strongly a threat of revolution was rising in the African nation that the settlers had to restructure their society in response. The relative backwardness of the Southern economy was an expression of the living contradictions in the slave system." Part 2 of the chapter is all about, slavery versus settlerism. Slavery, while incredibly profitable, was becoming an obstacle for the continued growth of settler society. If capitalists wanted to grow a profitable labor force, they could either A, import slaves, fueling the fires of insurrection, or they could B, employ wage labor, which had a far lower rate of profit. Settlers needed a third alternative. For small planters, the expansion and maintenance of slave labor seemed like the obvious answer, but for capitalists who were just decades away from national monopolies, the answer was to import cheap Eastern European labor. J. Sakai says, while the Northerners saw the increasing dangers of a slave economy with its mounting captive armies of Africans, the planters saw the same dangers in importing a white proletariat. The creation of such an underclass would inevitably, they thought, divide white society, since the privileged life of settlerism could only stretch so far. Or in other words, too many whites meant an inevitable squabble over dividing up the loot. And that's chapter 3, more or less. Anybody want to add anything to that, or want to correct me on anything?
That's a pretty solid summary, honestly.
Okay, dope. So starting off, Alil had a question about the Haitian Revolution. Do you want to go ahead and say what that was?
Yeah. So I wanted to explore what was the significance of the Haitian Revolution with regards to how the settler slavers basically handled the question of slavery and how it would continue. Immediately they were, I shall say, spooked by the fact that a black population successfully led a revolution in Haiti and freed themselves from the slavers there. Yeah, very intense and poignant moment. Just how pressing the decisions and they would have to make. Yeah, how urgent they would be. What do y'all think about all that?
I personally don't know a whole lot about the Haitian Revolution, so anybody else want to talk about it?
I'll just say that the Haitian Revolution is really important because it was a successful slave revolution, and that they really did kick out their slave masters in that way, and that it really was a violent uprising, which is why it was not only then but today is still seen as this important moment as far as that era of time and what it meant to deal with the black nation.
And to add on, Deadman, and also, hey, Deadman.
Hey, Deadman.
Hey.
I'm plug the book Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. It is a book by a black Marxist historian uh, who goes through a lot of the revolution, and it applies here in particular because one thing that we can kind of see in this that you can still see reflected in some discourse today uh, is this overwhelming fear that gets brought up about what a decolonial or what a revolution of the oppressed people means for the former oppressors and for just beneficiaries of their system. Because they did kick out the relatively small population of whites from Haiti, but this was not just a flipping of, oh, well, whites were oppressing blacks, now blacks go oppress whites, ignoring not only the fact that the people getting kicked out were slave owners or the overseers for slaves. Uh, there's also the interesting story of the Poles in Haiti, where when Napoleon comes over to retake over and re-enslave the Haitian population, part of his army includes Polish troops who, once they arrive in Haiti, begin identifying with the Haitian revolutionaries rather than with the French who they were ostensibly allied with. They then switched sides, and the Haitians embraced them. They made them full citizens in a country where uh, you were only allowed to be a citizen if you were black, but what black meant was an oppressed group. So these white skinned people became black by the definition of the Haitians. They settled in Haiti and are still celebrated to this day.
Right.
True. I didn't know that about the Polish. Shout out to the Polish.
At least one's over with Napoleon then.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think what the Haitian Rebellion sets up is just like a clear example of how threatening a colonized revolution is to the status quo. You're looking at the first instance where you see like a coordinated mass media campaign throughout the United States, to kind of like make sure that nobody in the mainland heard about the revolt, because they didn't want the rest of the slaves to be emboldened by that. So they did like everything in their power to make sure that that news didn't reach the masses as much as possible when it was happening. And like the tactics used and everything like that, it really showed. Because I mean, like when Napoleon came back to Haiti, it was something like, I think he brought like 30,000 men or some shit like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how much. I think it's how many troops he had brought with him. And had it not been for the fact that the the like the Haitians knew their land, and like for example, they allowed I think it was malaria. It was either malaria or yeah, I think it was malaria. To sweep through the French camps to basically like what's that word? Where they what is it? We decimate the French troops, so that so it would be easier for them to then attack them after like the malaria season. And that was like one of the successes, right? So um, it it goes to show like they employed a lot of guerrilla tactics. They employed just like they were organized in how they did it, and that's one of the reasons why it was so threatening to America, which was so close, and that had such like a huge slave population, not only with Africans but also with First Nations people as well.
And as you say that, I'm reminded in this chapter, there's a section about the Seminole Wars, where the Seminoles, a group of combined uh, African escapees and Native Americans, did much the same thing in the Florida Everglades for, I think it was a couple decades.
Yeah, I actually think the Seminole Wars are talked about in the next. Was it the next chapter?
Is the next one.
It's the next
Ah,
one. Yeah,
dang
yeah.
it.
No worries.
No, no,
But
no, it's important.
Spoiler.
it,
Because
it is
we're
important.
getting
I'm
to
glad
the,
you brought it up. Yeah.
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 Well, right
Chapter
now we're just
4.
setting up what slavery is as an institution, and I think it's really important to just contextualize that slavery was a violent institution and it shaped the basis of America, and that it wasn't just there were some bad white people who were slave masters and then the North was good. It's like no, the whole project was based on this very real commodification of the black person as a labor force, but simultaneously seeing that as a grand threat because now you have this black population that does have the potential to form an armed militia and overthrow the entire colonial project.
And in the same instance not hold on to bigotry, which was also, I think, like, fuck, I wish I could pull up the person in the quote, but like one of the things, like one of the um I don't know if he was just like a prominent slave owner, or I mean politician or prominent slave owner at that time were probably synonymous with each other, but one of
Facts.
them
Yeah.
one of them basically made the comment of like how surprised they were that they were able to actually organize and coordinate with like anybody.
Right.
And like, because I mean, like, after the Haitian rebellion they allowed not only any slaves basically free, basically become freemen, like, on the island, but also any native peoples that wanted to go there, they would also receive the exact same incentives of being like a person and being able to have their own like sovereignty or autonomy at least. So it was like this whole thing, and like I did it's I think it's funny how like those at the top, and you see this time and time again, just completely underestimate those who are pressed down, like, that are pushed all the way to the wall every time, underestimated every fucking time. And then when shit fucking happens, it's like, oh my god, what's going on? Like you saw it, like, you see it with the slave revolts, you see it with, just you see it with First Nations people fighting back, you see it with during the Mexican Revolution, you see it, and then during like when the EZLN fucking came out, right? Like it was the same thing. Like they didn't believe that First Nations people could organize themselves. They thought that they were too, that they weren't smart enough. They literally thought like that they were dumb. Like they second class, lower class people. And you know, it's just, to me it's sad, but it's also funny because it's just like, at the same, because like you can only, because in the back of my mind I always think, I'm like, they don't think we're that smart. So I mean, at least we have that working for us. Like,
Right.
True.
And also
True.
just like I feel like a lot of that does come from the era of time it was. I feel like that's still a sentiment, but that is very much a part of how dominant groups will contextualize the people they subjugate. That they can't imagine them to have the kind of intelligence to fight back because that's too anxiety inducing. The idea that you have a demographic that's subjugated, but that they have the intelligence to actually like kill you in your sleep. Like no one wants to sleep with that kind of conscience.
Which then creates a contradiction that threatens the system at times, such
Yeah.
as where the revolts actually do happen.
You know, I mean, I don't mean to to get too off topic, but this does relate to what you guys are talking about. Like Chris Smalls, this does relate to what you're talking about. Chris Smalls, who just recently uh got fired from Amazon, who was organizing the protest against Amazon. Amazon made a smear campaign to make him look unintelligent and incoherent and like unarticulate. so that way like the workers can quell not being able to organize with him to begin with. So like
Yeah,
it
that's
goes it goes to show that things haven't changed since then.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Actually, that yeah, like that, like the internal documents that came out from the higher ups, where they were just like, we hate this person, you know, how dare he, you know, think that he's smarter than what he is, and blah blah blah. Like, there's just a, and you know, we're talking about like people from, you know, the CEO boardroom, and yeah, you're like, they like 100%, like it's the disconnect between the elites is still there. Like to think that, you know, and then but then at the same time, you know, they are smart enough to try to use that against us, you know, that for disinformation and whatnot. So yeah, that is a very good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this quote in Capital Chapter 1, Capital by Karl Marx, that is, where he says about like the creation of the commodity, they don't know it but they do it, in reference to like the contradictions in capitalism. And that's very evident here that um, at the start of slavery, slave owners were not aware that they were creating a political economy in which like they needed slave labor because the profit margin was really really high, but having like a whole lot of slaves means that eventually you're outnumbered, and that's like a critical contradiction here. um, and then like this chapter just says like eventually they figured it out, or at least the northern urban folks figured out that the slave system is sorry, has a antagonistic contradiction that cannot be solved by any other method than abolishing slavery.
And what's important in particular on that is how Sakai
It's all
is showing that it's not about any sort of moral arguments that are switching the positions of these northern capitalists. It's instead the slaves putting the fear of God in them.
Facts, yeah, 100%.
I think you know, it's almost as if um in order for us to make real progress our people's freedom, or for all people's freedom, we can't take incremental reformist steps. We almost need to abolish the entire system of capitalism.
Facts.
I
Absolutely.
mean, that's fire here.
Look, y'all,
Definitely
look. Settlers are
fire.
bad, but we don't have to get rid of capitalism. I don't know about this.
Like adding
Listen,
on to
just
that specifically, like it made me think of Michael Parenti's Democracy for the Few, and how he's exploring how the United States constitutional system came to be, and opposed to the current popular myth that it was all about liberty and freedom. The key thing was for these capitalists holed up in their cottage trying to decide how to spread out the profits. It was about creating a government that has the form of a popular democracy with as little of the substance as possible. So, kind of upholding that illusion was going to be a crucial strategy for these capitalists. Well into our modern times. Yeah, they benefit from the reformist perspective.
100%. Yeah, I mean, as long as you're dealing with capitalism as a system, you're gonna have, yeah. If you choose reform, then your reforms are always going to be under attack, and you'll be fighting the fight of labor against capital literally forever, in continuity. And yeah, that really
And
is. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
You're
Did
good.
you want to say something?
I was just gonna say that kind of alludes to the very start of American ideology. You know, covering up what it actually is, and you know, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Skyler.
Okay. Well, I was gonna say, and even with reform, like, even if you reform something in the favor of liberal interests, you know, using liberal in the best terms possible, like, it can always be reversed to fascism. It can always be reversed back to it can always be reformed back to fascism. It can always be reformed back into it can always be reformed back into to neocolonialism. It can always be reformed back into the interest of the capitalist settler class. and plus, reform doesn't even address the fact that we live in a settler state. It doesn't even address the fact that we live in in a state that perpetuates the class interests of the bourgeoisie. So it doesn't even address those problems to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that.
So
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, no. To jump from that, I would say that it wouldn't be a regression into a fascism, as fascism very much is a byproduct of leftist failures in the context of capitalism and its contradictions, as much as I would say the reality is there are inherent relationships between the settler and all non-settlers within any particular region. The only thing that is true is that if those contradictions aren't resolved, then the only actual like thing that the system can do is genocide. It's the basis of how the US became this giant empire. That
Right.
when all else fails, you just eliminate a segment of the population and just give away this freedom that America says it has, which is just here is this stuff that once belonged to someone, now it's yours for the quote idea of freedom. But what that freedom is now you are a vanguard of this particular idea of the settler state.
Right.
Pandemic says hello.
Oh, hello.
Just like just following up on the idea of genocide. That's exactly what we have our hands right now with the pandemic. It's very
Facts.
clear which portions of our population are disproportionately being affected by it.
Yeah, facts. I mean, we have. I was gonna say, like, when Deadman was saying that, and now you mentioned the COVID crisis, like, yeah, absolutely. Like, we have a situation where the conservative position, in the context of J. Sakai's, chapter 3, the conservative position is slavery, and the liberal position is eugenics. Like, it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
That's absolutely like what it devolves to. I mean, the like even in the liberal stronghold of L.A. County, just for example, yeah, the L.A. County prison has expanded 4 times since the 80s, while the amount of money that's spent on public programs for the poorest individuals, I think the budget has actually been stagnant or gone down just a little bit, and like the liberal position is not actually better; it's just more polite. I mean, in the
It's
conservative
not even that.
situations.
It's that
Okay.
it is the alternative to the right wing ideology. It's just not right. That's its entire grift. So if
Right,
one group
right.
of people wants to openly do genocide, your thing is, well, we're not going to do that. We still want to deal with this problem population.
Mhm.
We're just not going to explicitly imply genocide.
True. Yes. Yeah. I mean, like it's no mistake that liberals are just as complicit in the problem of the current prison industrial complex. And yeah, I agree with you. Not that not that like the prison industrial complex is the same thing as what we're talking about in the chapter, but similar
Oh, no.
situation. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the new form of slavery. It's the way that they can kind of hide it behind their statistics and whatnot.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was just about to say.
True, true. Did anybody notice that there was something about male slaves in this chapter?
Yes.
Yeah, in the wake
Or
of,
male slaves or woman slaves?
it said right here it says in the wake of the Vesey conspiracy, for instance, the Charleston City Council urged the number of male Africans in the city to be greatly diminished, and they were.
Right.
Yep. You know, I think it was also in this chapter that Deadman might have also been alluding to how female slaves were basically turned. Like Jefferson had this quote about how he'd make more money with uh, selling the children of a single woman than like 50 men, which this sort of gendered component is all part of the uh, both material and the ideological patriarchy of the settler society, where people who you're most worried about killing you are these men, but then women are not just property for themselves, but can become property because they can reproduce. And I'm not really sure where to go from there, but that's just
That basically black women, they become an instrument of this new black identity in the
Yeah.
empire, in a way that
Mhm.
black men are very almost completely, not completely, but to some degree disposable. That they are seen as the first group of people to eliminate, where black women, like many women in situations under patriarchy, are treated as a reusable good to reproduce populations.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Go for it.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was reading that. I remember reading that, and I noticed that there was a strong emphasis on eliminating black males for some reason, and I didn't understand why. Can someone explain that?
Yeah. There was a very sharp example towards the beginning of the chapter discussing Thomas Jefferson's kind of position on the matter, where he was seeking out a gradual genocide of the black population. And his thing was, let me find the exact quote. Um, yeah, he says, I consider the labor of a breeding woman as no object, and that a child raised every 2 years is of more profit than the crop of the best labor. So it could basically be reduced to the fact that if a person can make new slaves, that's a new commodity to be sold under these systems.
Exactly. And again, it's the thing that's important here is it's not just a matter of blackness as black slaves, but women under a patriarchal system, and how
Mhm.
and how women are subjugated specifically.
Facts.
Oh,
It's almost like things are kind of intersecting.
Oh man,
Whoa.
not that word.
yeah, that makes sense. Actually, that makes a lot of sense to me. Now that you put it that way.
Mhm.
um, yeah, this is where we need Angela Davis to help us talk about this a little bit. I mean, like, Angela Davis would be a great person to have in this meeting. Um,
If you got her number.
Right.
Yeah, dude, I'll shoot her an email. Maybe she'll hop on next time.
There you go.
yeah,
But yeah, Women Race Class, great book. If anybody wants a
I
recommendation.
have a copy of that book actually. It's a great book. Totally.
Hmm. She actually refers to herself one time in there as a layman, and I'm like, what the fuck? Like,
Really?
you're a layman. What am I? You know?
Oh my! I'm a learner. That's what it is. I'm a learner.
Yeah, there you go. Um, but yeah, absolutely. I think that this chapter alludes to the very start of American eugenics without the use of the word eugenics any point in there. So where has the legacy of eugenics led us since the end of slavery, do you guys think?
It's pretty much the basis of how we even talk about peoples outside of the Western hegemony. I mean, like the probably the most obvious one in our spaces is this whole ID, or not ID poll, IQ discourse. People who
Mm.
still think that
Mhm.
there's some relevance in human IQ in reference to other human beings, when like the entire basis of IQ is based on very arbitrary tests and taking a snapshot of human intelligence rather than looking at the whole of a human person.
Absolutely, and then that builds into uh, even some of the uh, climate change type responses that you get, where you contrast the sort of techno utopians who are going to fix climate change, always associated with the high IQ, versus those like supposedly inferior, like third world people who keep just breeding irrationally and
Hmm.
all of that. Uh, Hell, you can even see this in some of the stuff like David Attenborough documentaries, where
Oh yeah.
overpopulation becomes this big boogeyman, but it's always a very particular overpopulation.
And to jump from that, especially with David Attenborough, because again, I'm definitely someone who has heard his nature documentaries and specials. How he talks about nature, and I think one person that can really kind of combat his narrative is someone like Richard Lewontin. Just how biology becomes imperial, how it has these very fixed gender and sex dichotomies that are regurgitating our social ideas rather than actually looking at nature out how it actually is. And Richard Attenborough definitely is an example of someone who does that.
Yeah.
Word. Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm not actually familiar. So could you just do like a quick summary of who he is and what he does?
Richard Lewontin or David Attenborough?
David Attenborough.
He's a narrator, and I think he's a scholar in his own right, but he's more well known for being a narrator of different films, specifically nature documentaries, and he's very cherished. But the way he describes nature, and especially when you kind of do think about how he describes it, a lot of it has a very chauvinistic idea about nature, this idea of alphas kind of conquering the landscape, or the idea of the frontier and what that means as far as nature. And it's all about his own biases in narrating coming across when he explains the natural world.
Word. Okay. True. That's interesting. I was reading poetry done by this is a slightly off topic, but I was reading poetry done by the Black Panthers recently, and I know that Planned Parenthood was like started by a eugenicist or a group of eugenicists or whatever, but during the 60s, I don't know if that legacy stuck around, but in one of the poems written by a woman, she mentioned Planned Parenthood as a conspiracy to kill black people. Is that anything anybody here is familiar with?
I mean, I've heard Planned Parenthood or any sort of like abortion thing argued that it's for culling of minority people or culling, yeah, and so it's like, on the one hand, I mean, sure, I do see that perspective, but on the other hand, like, when you look at, like, why is it okay, once again, then you fall into the aspect of like, okay, like, why is it okay for rich white people to get abortions or at least have access to adequate care, and why is it bad then for poor people to have access and adequate care? You know what I'm saying? Because I think that's the better conversation I feel to have in that regard. But it's just, but I mean, the person who did, but didn't the person who found Planned Parenthood, wasn't she a eugenicist?
Yeah, she believed in
Margaret
eugenics because her whole thing was she wanted to give birth control overwhelmingly to black women to keep the black population down. And that the thing about abortion, especially Jane Elliott, she's actually made this point before. She's the person who does the whole blue-eyed brown eyes experiment. There's a book called The Birth Dearth, and it's about how the modern pro-life movement is actually about white supremacy, but under the guise of maintaining the white population, which is why abortion is treated differently in black and brown spaces by these organizations versus white spaces. And that there is a very meaningful idea of, we have two options. Either we eliminate the black and brown population, or we make sure that the white population is sustainable. And so it's really about limiting white women's access to birth control and other things like that, where if you're really rich, that obviously doesn't affect you, but if you're middle class, the general idea is to prevent white women from having abortions, to keep the white population up.
What
Word.
in the world?
Word. Yeah, that's just the Planned Parenthood thing, like, is kind of a new idea to me. I don't like, and obviously this is like a really touchy subject. I'm just not familiar with any of that, so I just wanted to ask if anybody knew. But yeah,
The short
interesting
version is
information.
Planned Parenthood is effective at delivering general health as both for women and birth control, like all of those different things, but it's a private organization who was started by someone who was a eugenicist. But the biggest thing is that they are one of the most effective simply because health care, and especially in regards to like birth control, women's health, all of that stuff has always had to fight against the Christian hegemony and Christian dominionism that's not interested in giving women any autonomy over their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the big thing is they may have started from this eugenic space, but they provide a service that benefits people who have been deprived of those rights in the first place.
Yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes that fact that it was started by eugenicists could be used by right wingers to just justify a pro-life position and make all abortion illegal, and they think that that's like a big mic drop by dropping that fact, and most people don't know that, and so it makes certain conversations difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I could absolutely like see how it could be used, and we see it every day how it's used, or Planned Parenthood specifically is like weaponized and shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of layers to this whole thing.
Yes. Yeah. But interesting to know. Interesting to know.
Okay.
Alright, so where does
Well,
that leave us?
I
in
didn't
the
know
chapter?
any of that. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Okay. You want to go back to the book?
Yes, absolutely. Alright, so for the second part of Chapter 3, Settlerism versus Slavery. In total, anybody want to give their thoughts about why settlers picked settlerism over any kind of like more egalitarian formation?
I mean, I think that isn't that like what's set up in the first two chapters, right? Is that America or like Western European or Europeans that came over here, like they eventually like fell into that class lifestyle, right? Where they were finally able to get a piece of that, like they could finally be at the top sort of shit. So, and then they fell into the whole thing of like, oh, my life is way easier now. Why would I ever get this? I'm making money. I have all this, there's no incentive for me to do anything but this, and it was easy for the state to keep it up because it was just, yeah, hey, look at all these people succeeding, look at all the land that they have, look at all, I mean, didn't they give slaves to people like that were coming over here?
No,
Like,
they didn't give them slaves, but they had free access to the land.
Is that what it
regardless
was?
of where-
Very cheap access to the
Yeah.
land. It was like dollars for hundreds of acres in some cases.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
so then it
slaves
was
sold separately.
Yeah, slaves sold separately. but the fact was a lot of people that did come over here were already under the assumption that they would be able to benefit from having the slave trade, so that they could come over here by themselves, not have to worry about having children or a wife already in order to make their fortune.
So the other thing is, because we're getting to part 2 of chapter 3, one of the parts of this chapter talks about how the South as a main hub for black exploitation was used to navigate Europeans who came over to the North. So that way they wouldn't have to deal with what the antebellum South was.
Kind of an extension of the out of sight, out of mind that you get with modern day imperialism.
Exactly.
True.
And I think it's also interesting to note, just to sort of build upon, I think that was what Kamazadz was saying, was that the North had an outlet for folks who did wind up in trouble with like debts or problems being exploited, and that was just more land that they could go out to. There's this really famous American historian whose name is escaping me, who talks about the idea of the frontier and the eventual closing of the frontier as a major sort of shift point for the United States. And in the period we're at, we're very much in a period where you could just go west and take some more Native American land. If you're having too much trouble back where you're at. And then for those who are staying in the cities out east. Like, I've certainly remember seeing some statistics about how much they're making versus how much Europeans are making. Uh, and it's way higher in the United States. They had some of the highest wages in the world over there because the demand for this white immigrant labor at the time was extremely high. So you sort of do get a bit of this labor aristocracy that forms.
Chapter 4 ends up going into a lot of detail about those structures and statistics in particular thereof.
I keep skipping ahead. Dang it.
No.
Here's
It's
the-
all related.
It's all related. It's
You're
all
good.
related, and like not only that, but like I said it first. I think on like the first, or I said it last time on the first episode of this, where it was like chapters 4 and 5 are like really where this book like starts to like
Get you.
yeah, it starts
right.
getting into some shit. Like it's just like it's just kind of like, oh, you thought that shit was bad, yo.
Chapter 1 through 3 is literally okay. You know slavery was bad. Chapter 5 and 6. This is how you benefit.
Yeah, exactly.
right.
Yeah.
And
Actually,
actually,
though, did get into the deep details of like indigenous genocide, so like
Yeah.
that was still like very pertinent.
for that very reason, because 1, 2, and 3 are kind of a unit, and then 4, 5, and 6 are also like sort of their own thing. Actually, chapter 4 up until like 8 are like their own thing. I kind of wanted to take this opportunity to like review chapters 1 and 2 as well. Later on though, so
Sure.
we can get into that like later. But yeah, if you mention stuff from like chapters 4 and 5, totally cool with me. Yeah, no.
I think I think like one of the I think like one of the biggest like carryovers from this time is this or not even carryovers, like just something that something that's carried over like the centuries from the settler class is this idea of like entitlement, right? Like
Right.
I was listening to a debate on Aiden Wood's channel the other day where they were talking with like a lib, and like the conversation of like, you know, land came up, right? And he's just like, well, if I want to own some dirt, right, if I want to own like an acre of land in Texas or whatever, you know, that's, you know, I should be able to lay claim to that. And it was like, well, and it's like, well, who do you buy this from? Where do you get it from? Oh, well, the state, you know, whatever. And it's like, well, that land doesn't belong to the state either. You know, that like the problem with ownership of land is that, you know, first of all, you know, what about the First Nations people that were here first that got displaced off that land? Do you feel like that they have a claim to the land if they come back to you? You know what I mean? And then and it's like this whole thing where it's just like you know, there's no argument for their side on that, like when they're confronted with that, because it's like to them, it's like, well, I'm here now, and I'm existing in the present as it stands now. So it's like, why should I be inconvenient? Like, I'm an American. This is what I'm entitled to, like, sort of shit. And
Exactly.
that mindset is what the settler colonial or that mindset is the settler colonial foundation. And that's the only, and like breaking that is why chapters 1, 2, and 3 are so important, is so that you can start getting over that that hump where it's just like that sentiment, right? You can see the reality of how that false sense of entitlement was constructed. And you know,
That entitlement is so powerful. It's like even amongst communist spaces that I'm involved in, occasionally I'll see some white leftists just being aghast at the idea that land back, even just engaging with the idea of land back, they liken it so often to the notion of an ethno-state, and
Oh yeah.
it's so
That came up on
disappointing.
in the Twitterverse yesterday or today.
Yesterday and today, every
Oh,
damn
yeah.
day.
every time.
I'm sorry, but there are people who really have no interest in the national question and want to do the, well, if white nationalists say it and I hear it from black and brown people, I guess it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually.
Or Snapple and Cats called it reverse colonization, like reverse racism.
Sure. I think earlier in the book, Jay Sakai puts it really well when he says, often like among communists, the land question in America never gets brought up because the settlers benefit from it. You know, and
Yep.
that's
Yep.
just, facts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's like one of the things where like I honestly like I love throwing that in liberals' faces. Like the more that I have like these like debates or conversations, it's one of because I'm trying to figure out how do I reach these kids, right? Like I'm trying to figure out what how can I talk to these people, and whenever confronted with the idea of like land back or reparations or whatever, they can't defend that even if they consider themselves being progressive or on the left. Like they don't defend it, and in fact they end up making themselves look worse because more often than not these people end up like they end up defending things like gentrification. Like gentrification is good actually, or like they end up defending and then they slip into this mentality of like, well, we have to exist in the present. And like, and it's just like, well, like, weren't you just talking about how we have to learn from the past and like, in order to actually develop any sort of like true ideological structure, we need to analyze and blah 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 blah. But in this instance, you want to sit there and say like, oh no, but we have to be cognizant. No, fuck that, fuck you. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was like Birth Marxist who the other day he tweeted out like, all of you guys, like when it comes to like abolishing, the class dichotomy and like doing this and that and developing a communist future, you're all on board with that. But as soon as like somebody mentions the land question or land back or whatever, you want me to draw out like an 80-point plan that says like this is the exact number of acres and blah blah blah, and like you want all the details and shit. It's like, no, fuck that. Like,
Look, we're all leftist until we have to do something.
right?
I didn't sign up to this to work. I mean, come on, guys.
Look, I want the revolution over there. I don't want to get involved.
yeah, fucking Christ. That's like I've been reading this book, which I'm after the stream I'm going to be doing continuing. I've been reading this book by the EZLN. It's called Critical Thought in the Face of the Capitalist Hydra. And it's like from a seminar from the Sixth Commission of the Zapatistas. Okay, and like one of the lectures here, Subcomandante Moses it talks about how their progress only came from being organized and from constantly being in struggle. And when you he references like a situation where like at a meeting somebody gets up and says like, I don't want to be basically he says like, I don't want to do any of the communal labor anymore, I don't get enough benefit from it, I won't participate, I'm only going to do what personally benefits me. And everybody was just kind of like, think about what you're saying, like you have you doing 3 days of communal labor versus going and doing 3 years of labor, alone or as like working like as a guard post or whatever. Like think about what you're saying. Like you're giving up a little struggle for this. And he references like that once you start getting that mentality, that's when you cease to be a Zapatista. But like I think that in like the first world revolutionary sense, like they're all stuck in that mentality, right? That first world revolution of like, like, well, I want my justice now, but I don't want to put the effort into it. Somebody else needs to do the start for it, and then I'll just walk along with it. And it's like, if that is your mindset, we're never going to start taking those steps. Like if that is truly what is at the heart of, in the back of your mind, like you aren't a revolutionary. Like you aren't in this to make progress.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the way Jay Sakai put it was he said all settler classes are bourgeoisified, which couldn't possibly be more true. Yeah.
Bourgeoisified.
Bourgeoisified.
Hello, guys.
Hey, y'all.
Hey, what's going on, homie?
Hey,
Hello.
Just alive.
nice.
That's good.
So this whole discussion just has me thinking about how fundamental the land question really is to capitalism on a much broader and deeper level. Because Jay Sky is emphasizing this a lot, and there's good reason for this. I mean, after all, we have to ask ourselves, capitalism has created contradictions from its very beginning. It has created these classes that should have an interest in overthrowing it at every stage in its history, and it's been very persistent. And one of these main ways that it has been so persistent and so pervasive is this land question. I think I've mentioned this book in previous discussions, but Ellen Wood's The Origins of Capitalism actually situates the origins of capitalism in a form of the land question, where the ideology of that is that you quote unquote improve, where improve means something along the lines of being productive for markets,
Mm-hmm.
being producing commodities.
Speculation.
Exactly.
Speculation to a degree, yes, and then uh, the land itself being a commodity, being important, but also what gets produced on the land all being commodities rather than
Mm-hmm.
something that you can just like exist on or uh, just support yourself on.
Right.
So this starting in England and of course coming over to the United States, because you can see this all throughout Sakai chapter 1 through 3, where the land is something that has to be engaged in markets. The settler colony, I think it was chapter 1 or 2, has never been self-sufficient.
Exactly.
This then
Small interjection.
pushes. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I had to head out, you all. Thanks for
Oh.
having me on.
Yeah,
Thanks for
Thanks for
absolutely.
coming.
Thanks for being here. Good to
Yeah,
meet
nice
you.
to talk with you.
So just to finish my thought, uh, with this, it becomes this very pervasive thing uh, that it's useful in diverting potential alliances of uh, exploited classes from like various levels of exploitation, of course. Uh, it's useful for uh, creating dependency upon a world trade system. Uh, just this changing of the land into this individualized thing is so pervasive and becomes so necessary to overcome in order to actually challenge capital.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I couldn't put it better. But yeah, it says a whole lot about, and I mentioned this when you mentioned that book before. It says a whole lot about our society when John Locke's reason for the justification of colonizing, you know, the United America, what later became America, was that like basically the Indians aren't making their land profitable enough, therefore it's our right to take it. Ayn Rand agreed with him, by the way. Fun fact.
Damn.
Yeah. And then one thing I'll jump off from on that point is just it's not just production; it's also the monopoly on violence, and how
Mm-hmm.
like if you talk about land, you have to talk about like once you have that land, you have to defend it. You can't just have it. And that when you have this private ownership, you have this real collusion for private interests and the monopoly of violence. So it's not just you own the land, it's also now you own the land in conspiracy with other landowners against those who don't have land.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a real important distinction you just had there, Dead Man, on in conspiracy with other landowners, because it's not even necessarily what gets recognized as the state, though the state is generally subordinate to these landowners. Uh, but that the landowners themselves are often the perpetuators of violence, as we saw in chapter 1 with Bacon raising his uh, militias, or as we can even see today with things like stand your ground laws and castle doctrine.
Hmm.
Exactly.
I'm gonna have to step out because I have to make dinner pretty soon. But thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming,
Later,
Skylar.
Skylar.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for
Later,
coming.
homie.
Take care. Have a good rest of your book session.
Absolutely. See you next time. Yeah, and at the time, we're not just talking about like organized groups of people who owned land or like joined official militias, but like literally just cartels of settlers who have the same interest and agreed with each other like on a person to person basis to terrorize black and brown folks and chase them off their land.
Exactly. And that if we relate that to the now, that's how you explain these different demographics of, you have these anti-lockdown protesters who like they don't have to all know each other and be part of the same org, but they're the same kind of white settlers who are losing
Mhm.
money because they're not exploiting people and they're not being able to exploit people. And that like there is a solidarity in class interests, and especially when you're of a dominant class.
Yep. I'd also like to take this moment to just remember that very recently, Ahmaud Arbery was murdered in the heat of fascist violence, murdered by two white supremacists. So keep him in your thoughts.
Yeah.
He was going to turn 26 tomorrow.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, so this kind of violence that we're talking about still persists, whether it's motivated by, individual fits of rage or like a coordinated effort to do something economic. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that shit.
This book always
Very
brings
upsetting.
up heavy stuff.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
So what other parts are we going to talk about as far as part 2 of chapter 3?
I think now is about high time that since we have like less than 30 minutes left or so, we should probably just like talk about review like summarizing chapter 1 and 2 like up until this point to catch everybody up.
Okay.
Cool. So anybody want to say anything about chapter 1 as like a summary or things that stuck out to them?
I would say that chapter 1 is great in that it lays out the basic definitions and ideas of what we're going to see from here on out as far as the formation of the Americas as a project, and that it has nationhood, settler identity, and what a Euro-American is the three main parts of its analysis
Facts.
of just laying everything out. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the other really big thing that I took away from chapter 1 was that not only is like the settler American project in America today like not self-sufficient and has never been self-sufficient, but also everybody in the economy had something to do with slavery. North, south, middle, left, right, didn't matter. Like everybody was wrapped up in the slave economy.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really like that it even made clear that African slavery was importing a whole proletariat. And by the time we get to chapter 3, they realized they had imported an enemy army. And changes were only made not because they changed their mind about slavery, but because they needed to protect their own safety and they're afraid of a revolution.
Facts. All right. Chapter 2. What stood out to people about chapter 2, and what are like the big things to take away about that?
I'd say that the big takeaways I had for chapter 2 was the issues of how contingent any sort of alliances between the exploited classes and settlers in the early American system, which of course persists even to the present, and how many of the more things which within settler propaganda are said to be about uh, liberty and independence and freedom are really more about sort of deciding which particular group gets to do the spoils, uh, with the actual people who need liberation and freedom uh, not really being uh, able to get much real freedom out of it, with the like occasional exception where they just manage to play one group off the other just long enough to get out of the country.
True. Yeah. Any kind of alliances are definitely like alliances of convenience between settlers and the proletariat, rather than like actual meaningful comradely kind of alliances to get some social issue solved or whatever. Yup.
I also really liked just reframing the reasons for the Revolutionary War too. Like we like exactly what Surplus just said, so that they can be the ones to colonize the land and get the British out of their way, and it's interesting even reading that within the context of COVID, because I've even started to see people like white older right wingers posting on Facebook that them rejecting these stay-in orders is the same, or they feel like it's the same as rejecting the redcoats. And it's like the people who are staying
Oh,
inside
God.
are the ones who wouldn't have fought against the redcoats. And it's like, whoa.
That
Wh-
too,
What?
like pretending like the American Revolution was anything to be proud of. Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
you fought against the British, black slaves. Yeah, we're fighting with the British. We don't want to be slaves.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's Thomas Jefferson. All men are created equal. He's black slaves. What the fuck?
I want to talk about Thomas Jefferson real quick too, because a lot of people like to think that he owned slaves, but he also criticized slavery. He also like really hated it, and he just didn't have the opportunity to end it. But if he did, he would have ended it.
The
And we see
fucking
in this
That's
chapter
sorry.
and
just
the
an
last chapter,
excuse for being a
he was just
hypocrite.
afraid of revolution, and so he didn't. And I was looking too at what's it called? The hold on. Monticello, his old plantation is like now a tourist landmark.
Yeah.
And if you go on their website and to that place, they'll talk about how Thomas Jefferson was actually nice to his slaves, and
Oh,
how
God.
Is that the word for it?
he owned 600 slaves, but he never bought or sold any of them, and he even freed 7 of them, and
That
he even
works,
tried to
kids.
like give
Wow,
incentives
7.
sometimes. He tried to give incentives instead of whipping all the time. And his like first memory was being held in the hands of a slave that was riding a horse. And his last memory was this intimate moment with one of his slaves, and his last words was telling him to adjust his pillow. And like he really did care about his slaves. And so it's so weird how it's
Or,
they are trying to like I want to say whitewash, but I guess it's already whitewashed. But
yeah, or that one time when he impregnated that one slave like
yeah,
6 times and never even bothered to raise them.
exactly.
Man, he really cared about black slaves that he owned, like slaves.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's
I
so
mean, to
weird
be
how
fair,
that still
we live
goes
in a
on today.
country where what is it? Hamilton has a play about him being like a cool black guy or something. So like,
Yeah.
he should survive.
I didn't know
And
that.
he's like really popular apparently.
Jeez.
Yeah, the slave that I think Gaming Fan mentioned was Sally Hemings, just for anybody who was curious, who was impregnated like 6 times or whatever, and I think that
Yeah.
she actually wrote a book or something about that. Um,
Jefferson's like the ultimate like I'm not racist.
Yeah.
oh yeah, dude,
or excuse me, I'm not a racist, but like
Thomas Jefferson in a nutshell.
like
It's like I'm not racist, but
not only was he like racist, he had cognitive dissonance about his slave owning. He was a fucking slave owner and a like planter and shit, but also he didn't have the like decency to be like intellectually consistent about anything. Like,
Oh, he was a capitalist.
yeah, facts. Like,
Right.
real piece of shit. We don't stand Thomas Jefferson.
We don't say that name in this house.
Definitely. What are people saying in chat? By the way, if anybody in chat has questions, now is the time.
Oh, I'm not even watching the stream. What channel is in your comment?
Oh yeah, this is my channel. Hey, I'm Young Simba.
He's young, is Simba.
Yeah, and then we get to chapter 3, which is kind of the start of eugenics, contradictions in slavery, and then yeah, I mean everything we've been talking about. So does anybody else want to say anything about chapter 2?
Did we
Hold
talk
on, I like how Mailbox Spider said Thomas Jefferson is the Joe Biden of the founding fathers.
Did he?
Man,
Oh shit.
like most of the founding fathers were Joe Biden.
Yeah.
True.
But no, I feel like we talked about two, but one thing I'll say is that it really does show how there were natural alliances based on the material conditions, and how if you were a settler, your identity was pretty consistent with what the project was, and if you weren't a settler, not only did you exist outside that system, but that there were many alliances formed to subvert that system, and how anyone who was a part of that settler project, like if they did form alliances, it was ultimately to kind of betray those projects.
True. I mean, yeah. 100%, unfortunately. And it really sucks. Oh, actually, the other big thing that I took away from chapter 2 is it really sucks that even, like, the most quote-unquote, like, class conscious of settler historians can get that shit wrong. Because Herbert Aptheker, like I said, wrote a book called The Negro Slave Revolts that has that part, like, about Bacon in it. And J. Sakai, like, it turns out that he was wrong, and J. Sakai criticizes that. And then Philip Foner wrote The Black Panthers Speak, as well as a 10-volume series of books about labor history and in the United States, as well as like something about, I think he did do slavery up until 1980 something. But both of them were settlers, both of them were communists, and they were both incredibly wrong about a bunch of shit. And it really pays to know, because I fucking loved Philip Foner. You know, I took him at his word for everything, but yeah. Settlers do be wrong a lot.
Fucking chat.
Never trust Whitey.
There you go.
Chat. Read Settlers. Read settlers.org. It's shit's free. Fucking do it. Oh man.
You want a modern revolution? Understand America as it actually is.
Yeah.
Facts.
True.
Yeah.
Does chat have any questions? Does chat have anything? They just vibing?
I haven't gotten any, so if nobody else has anything to say about the chapters up until 3, I think this is a decent place to jump off. Is that cool?
Okay.
Anybody else got anything to say?
Nope. Just read Settlers. It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Read Settlers. Okay, cool. So to sign off, I'm gonna go through everybody again, plug all your shit, and tell us one reason why you should read Settlers. Deadman, go.
Deadman Animations here on YouTube and also on Twitter. And you should read Settlers so you won't be a settler. Don't be one. It's gross.
True. Gaming fan?
I'm gaming fan and my YouTube channel, Michael Mendez, which I don't know how to edit my videos, so get used to that. And I recommend Settlers. I recommend Settlers because I think it's a enlightening book, show you the true history of the United States. For basically, the United States is the embodiment of not racist, but
True. Surplus Cornbread?
Yeah, I'm Surplus Cornbread. I am on Twitter, and the reason you should really read Settlers is so that I don't have to see your crappy, ignorant takes on my timeline. Please,
True.
make my timeline Sure.
Thanks. Damon.
Yeah, I'm Damon, and I'm on Twitter at whoisdamon, and I'm on YouTube and Twitch, and you should read Settlers. Yes, for definitely like gaming fans that to know the real history, and a lot of these people who are given these bad takes need to take time to learn, and that's okay to be in a place where we can learn. Social media, I think, makes us feel like we need to have an opinion on everything. We give you permission to take some time to not have an opinion on things for a while and to just take some time to read and learn and listen. It's okay, and then you can come back with opinions some other time in the future.
Facts. It is in fact okay to say I don't know enough about that. Let me learn
Yes.
more about it.
Yeah.
Please say that.
All right,
We want intellectual honesty.
True. You don't want to be a Thomas Jefferson. Camazotz.
Be a Thomas Paine.
Yeah, I'm Kamazotz. I'm actually the only one on here that's right about everything. So...
I can't argue that.
Yeah.
No.
He has spoken.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I'm Kamazotz. Follow me on Twitter at Kamazotz with an A at the end after, so CAMATOZA. Okay. Yeah, so follow me on Twitter. I'm on the Twitch at Kamazotz_alter. I'm on YouTube at KamazotzzAlter. Yeah, I mean, read Settlers so that you just don't, so then that way you can actually have a true conversation with colonized people, especially if, and it's not just for Americans, you know what I mean? If you're any sort of fucking, if you're descended from any sort of Western imperialist, you know what I'm saying? Like, you should be doing this, whether you're Spanish, whether you're fucking British, hell, even if you're coming from China, hey, there's going to be a Settlers 2 Electric Boogaloo coming out soon for fucking all the subjugation of South Africa, or Eastern and South Africa. So, I mean, yeah, just educate yourself. It's not theory, it's history. So.
True. I'm Young Simba. Hopefully everybody knows where to find me. I mean, you're here. But yeah, yo it's Simba on Twitter, Young Simba everywhere else, including here on YouTube. And you should read Settlers because it's free, but also because fucking Marx isn't going to teach you this shit. Engels isn't going to teach you this shit. Nobody else is going to teach you this shit but fucking, like, colonized people. People who, like, understand this whole situation. I see a whole lot of people who have a whole lot of takes because, like, they read, like, this or that Marxist book or this or that anarchist book or whatever, and so, like, land back, like, isn't a big deal, but it is a big deal. It's going to happen out of historical necessity and a moral obligation to the people who have been toiling on Turtle Island for hundreds of years, and we can't just, like, push it to the sidelines. Like, if the theft of the land here is, like, the foundation of this, like, settler empire, then land back has to be the, like, principal part of the discussion of revolution here. That's the dialectic. So keep that in your mind. Other than that, much love. Hit subscribe and all that, and I'll see you guys next time for Chapter 4. Thanks to all my co-hosts. Peace.
Hasta luego.
Au revoir.
Hasta luego.